Hi, everyone. This is Steve with Church of the Undead, and I hope you enjoy this interview with Pastor Bob Croft from the Hyde Wesleyan Church in Clearfield, Pennsylvania. Hopefully, don't come off as too nervous, but Pastor Bob, you've spoke in front of hundreds of people at a time, and probably thousands of people over your lifetime. We get a few hundred views on our videos, so it's not really a big deal. But what I'd like you to do for anyone who might be listening to this interview today is kind of give us a quick rundown of how you came to know Jesus as your personal Savior. You know, what was that day like when you made that decision? And hopefully that'll help some others make that decision as well. So tell us about that first day you accepted Christ.
Okay, well, I come from a long line of Christ followers.
Hmm.
Um, my parents were pastors and missionaries. My grandparents were missionaries. My great grandfather, I remember as a small child, him laying his hands on our head and praying a blessing over us.
Wow.
Um, and so I grew up in a Christian environment, and it's easy in that kind of environment to just kind of assume and feel like you've grown into that space. But my parents tell me that before I can really remember, I don't know, they said I was 3 or 4 years old,
Hmm.
that they remember the first time that I prayed and asked Jesus to come into my heart. I
Okay.
don't really remember that, but I do remember when I'm trying to think, I think it was in the fifth or sixth grade, and we had made a trip out to Indiana to visit my grandparents. And I remember we came home that night. I don't know what it was that prompted it or stirred in my heart, but I couldn't sleep.
Okay.
And I laid there and wrestled, and just under conviction, I can't say that I know that this is what I prayed to ask God to forgive me of, but
Hmm.
I knew that my parents had always taught us that we had to have a personal relationship with Christ.
Right.
That it wasn't enough to just be in a church family or a pastor's home. And so I remember getting up in the dark of night. My parents were pastoring over in Port Matilda. And in that little parsonage, I found my way to my mom and dad's bedroom and called for my mom. She came out and we went into the living room, and I told her my struggle and that I needed to pray, and mom prayed with me there. And
Wow.
that's where I really look back to, as from that point I really saw myself as being a Christ follower.
Okay.
And
So you were fifth or sixth grade. What is that? About 10, 11 years old, something like
that's what
that?
yeah, I must
Okay.
have been 10 or 11.
Okay. And you
Yeah.
had said that your parents, grandparents, your pretty much your whole family were in ministry and still are to this day. But where uh, so they were missionaries. Where at? I mean, there are lots of different places, but at that time, when you first gave your life to Christ, that was, you said, in Port Matilda, Pennsylvania,
Right.
right? But up to that point, where's some
Um,
different places you
we,
used to live?
yeah. My dad had pastored in Port Matilda,
Okay.
and then they felt a call to the mission field, and they left Port Matilda and went to Suriname, South America.
Suriname.
And we
Okay.
lived back in the jungles.
Wow.
Had to, only way you could get there was a boat up the river.
Okay.
And I just have vague memories of that. There's some things that I'm not sure whether I remember it or I was just told it.
Yeah, you've probably
But
heard the stories enough times.
yeah,
Yeah.
I remember there, and I remember almost drowning. There's a picture that's always, I can see it in my mind. We lived on the river, and we had gone down to the river to swim, I think, and there was a boat dock with a ramp down into the water. We were playing on it. There must have been a hole in it,
Okay.
and I went down through.
Oh
And
no.
I was going down for the third time when one of the boys from our school grabbed me and pulled me out. And I can still see those roots under the water. And I could have died that day out
Oh
in the
my, yeah.
jungle,
Yeah.
but God
Now,
saved
at
us. And
that
then
point in Suriname, was that before or after your time in Port Matilda?
that was after our
That was
first time in Port Matilda.
okay.
And then we went to Grand Cayman, the Cayman Islands,
Okay.
and we stayed there until I was ready for fifth grade.
Oh, okay.
And we went back to Port Matilda, and we
Okay.
pastored there for 2 or 3 years.
Okay.
My dad did. And then we went back to Grand Cayman. And it was during that time in Port Matilda, that second time, that I had the experience of praying with my mom in the living room.
Okay. All right. That
And
makes
so,
sense.
and then we went back to Grand Cayman, and then my dad got burnt when we were in Grand Cayman,
Hmm.
almost died, and we had to move back home. We lived in Woodland for a while.
Okay.
Well, we lived in Port Matilda too for a little while, and then moved to Woodland.
Okay.
Then we went back to Grand Cayman, and we left there when I was ready for 12th grade and moved to Woodland. And I graduated from Clearfield then.
Okay. So your childhood, basically, you were traveling between central Pennsylvania and Grand Cayman Islands, right?
Basically, most of my growing up years, except
Hmm.
for that first part in Suriname.
Okay, in Suriname. Okay. And when you lived in Suriname, or when you lived in Grand Cayman, what kind of stuff did you guys do there as a family, or as a missionary family anyway?
Our dad pastored a church.
Okay.
It was one of the main churches on the island. And we went to school. We went to a Christian school. One of the Church of God Anderson had a school there,
Okay.
Triple C, and we attended school there. And we just grew up. What I felt was normal. As I look back on it, I really think of the Cayman Islands as home.
Wow.
If you think of where you grow up, it was in the Cayman Islands,
Right.
and I
Yeah, and
still
it's
have a lot of contact there and
it's a
connections
it's a
and friends.
really
And
new unique experience for a young boy, to grow up in that environment. At the time, you thought that was normal. That was the way everybody
yeah,
lived. But now you look back and it's like, wow, that was uh, really neat
yeah.
childhood growing up. I'm sure there's some scary times, like when your dad got hurt and all that. But so were you the only white kid in your community?
Not. I mean, that's hard to define, kind of, in the Cayman
Okay, so that
setting,
that
because
that,
the
that
Cayman people are such a mixed race.
okay,
So I had friends with blonde hair and blue eyes that were Caymanians, and I
okay,
had friends that were very, very dark, and
gotcha.
they're all Caymanians. And so it wasn't um, how would I say, too much of a feeling that you were um, an outsider.
That you didn't feel like you were too different, like you stood out from the
Not there were
crowd too
times
much.
that I think I encountered some racism that was maybe more nationalism.
Yeah,
Um,
because you were an
and then I
American.
had experiences like, I remember a friend of mine was sitting there, and I don't know what we were even talking about, but she was saying, I can't stand white people.
Oh,
And she was going on about white people. And I finally just said and called her by name, and I said, I'm
yeah,
white.
you're like,
She said, well, you
hello.
don't count. You don't count. You're just one of us.
Oh,
And so there was that kind of, you know,
huh. That's really neat. Well, so about fifth or sixth grade, then you gave your life to Christ, and before that, a lot of your memories are traveling back and forth and serving in the church, and it's just that was your normal upbringing. But after you gave your life to Christ, can you think of anything that maybe changed in your heart or in your life that you can kind of pinpoint?
Well, I mean, definitely, I think from that point on, I had more of a personal and intentional desire to follow Christ.
Okay.
I
Mhm.
think up until that time, it was more, I grew up in this family that I didn't know any different.
Right.
But as I think from that time on, I began to understand the personal nature of a relationship with Christ,
Right. Because
and
you
that
were you were
I
getting
was
about to
responsible.
that age where you're starting to understand there's
Right.
bigger things in the world than
Mhm.
just ourselves, and you're starting to think about a lot bigger things. So,
Mhm.
and that's typically, as usually when someone gives their life to Christ, they're usually a younger person. Maybe
Mhm.
they've been brought up in church, or maybe they go to Sunday school once in a while, and that's usually when at least the first encounter with Jesus happens when we're kids. But as we get older, sometimes we fall away, or we you know start questioning things and thinking of things. Did you ever go through a time like that in your life where you thought, um, maybe Christianity isn't the way to go? I don't know. Is
I guess I
is
have
that
to
something
say
that you ever considered?
I guess I have to say I haven't.
Okay.
Um, I've always had a questioning mind and a desire to learn. I love science and I love those kind of things, but I've never had a rebellious time of my life
Okay.
where I wanted to walk away. There were times in my life that if God hadn't had his hand upon me, I could have walked away just by circumstances and relationships.
Right.
But mom and dad always were there to talk me through those times
Gotcha.
and to not with a heavy hand, but with trying to help me to understand the broader picture.
Hmm.
Um, I I can remember I remember at times when I had invitations to go to parties and things that I had questions about, and I'd ask my mom and dad if I could go, hoping they would say no. And I trusted them, and there were times they said, "No, you can't do that." And I was relieved because then I knew I didn't have to make choices down the road
Okay.
where I would have been.
That's interesting.
Um,
Yeah.
I I think in looking back at my life and looking at other people's testimonies, sometimes that dramatic change that comes when someone that has lived a life of sin and lived far away from God and comes to a confrontation with Christ that causes them to change the direction of their life. That dramatic change is always intriguing and wow. But I
Hmm.
look at my life and I look at friends that I grew up with and where they have ended up. And I know a lot of people say God saved me from this and he saved me from that and he saved me from all these things. And I look at that the same way.
Yeah.
God did save me from it. I didn't experience it. That's how he saved me from it.
Right.
And that is just as, how would I say, that is just as powerful if you really get a grasp of that as God saving me out of those sins. He saved me from those sins.
Yeah. You
And I
you
was
you didn't
just
have to
as
experience those
likely,
things.
yeah, I was just as likely to go down those paths as anyone else if
Right.
Christ hadn't have saved me and kept me from
And
making
yep.
choices that could have.
And kept that faith in you strong. As you're talking, I'm thinking, your relationship with Jesus was so real and so strong from the get go because of your family heritage and because of your life that you lived as a young person. Your relationship was so strong, you had really no reason to think of any other alternative. If you have the truth, why would you even consider trust in a lie, right? And I think maybe that's kind of how your life has been. Your relationship has been so strong and so grounded that you never really even considered the option of any other way of life, because your life has been so blessed. And I think, from my perspective, I mean, the wisdom that you have and the compassion and mercy that you share with others comes from that solid, consistent life that you've lived. And you have a very unique and powerful perspective on life that's helped tons and tons of people. And hopefully you realize that.
I mean, anything that there is of me is only what God has allowed. But as you were talking, I was also thinking of a little story that I don't even know where I heard it, but it was someone was asking, when do you start training a child, like training them in the ways of God?
Right.
And the answer to that was, you start with their grandparents.
Mm.
And I know that I have a heritage that many people don't have, but I do look at my heritage as a big reason why I'm where I'm at.
Oh, absolutely.
And for those that don't have that heritage, it's not to say, oh, well, then I can't be, but you can start a heritage.
Oh, yeah.
You can become that grandparent
Mm-hmm.
that is going to train a child, that child's going to grow up to train a child. I don't know how far back in my genealogy there to go before there weren't Christians.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think my great grandfather on my father's side, I don't think was a Christian, but on my mother's side is a lot of my Christian heritage. My grandparents, my dad's side were Christian, but
Okay.
I think that that's important to understand, that a godly heritage doesn't dictate that you will be a Christian,
Right.
but it certainly makes the possibility for you to learn and know and to become and to grow much more possible.
Well, in the same way that a lot of families have just generational cycles that they're in, where they just seem to pass on negative, bad behavior,
Mhm.
sin, it just curse, whatever you want to call it. Generationally, it just seems to get passed down because there's, all those years, there's no intervention or no change in someone's life that breaks that generational negativity. In that same way, in a life like yours, it's generational in a positive way. Everyone has been
Right.
focused on the same end goal of serving Christ and being servants to others. And but that doesn't necessarily mean, just because you're born into that doesn't mean you're automatically a Christian. You still need
Right.
to make that decision for yourself in a
And I
personal
think
way. And
that can
that's
become a double-edged sword,
okay.
in the sense that it could help you to become a Christian, but it could also, as you say, just cause you to feel, well, I'm a Christian because
Okay.
of my
Yeah.
heritage,
Yeah. I see that. You get
and
a
you
little
never really
lackluster,
develop.
too comfortable with it. And you think, oh, I'm okay.
You develop a sense of entitlement, I guess you would say,
Yeah.
that
That probably happens a lot.
keeps you from making a personal decision.
Right. Right.
And so I think my parents always, how would I say, put us in a place where we knew we had to choose for ourselves,
Right.
and that they provided an environment where that could happen. And then when it did happen, they cultivated that and encouraged it, and helped us to develop our own personal relationship with Christ. And another thing mom and dad did early was included us in their ministry.
Okay.
We were uh, allowed to take part in ministry at an early age, whether it was helping teach and I remember teaching a small boys, a kindergarten class, had about 15, 20 boys, and a little tiny room. And I wasn't a teacher, I was a helper.
Okay.
And me and Ms. Marjorie, we would go in there and tackle those boys as all their rambunctiousness. But it was those kind of things that helped me to realize at an early age that God could use me.
Right.
And put within us, I think, all my brothers and sisters and God has called us into full-time ministry.
Right.
And we're all in ministry of some sort. And I think it was some of those things where mom and dad understood that if we were going to develop, we had to have, it wasn't going to be, okay, when you get to college, you can figure it out. But to help us to have opportunities for God to speak into our lives of what he wanted to do with us.
Right. So let's move on to more recent memories. Now, I remember a story you told one time that at one point in your life you wanted to maybe become a missionary pilot, get your pilot's license and fly missionaries around the world. And I know you still love to travel, and that's part of your serving now is leading missions trips to different places around the world, and even local community mission outreaches through the church there. But tell me a little bit more about your desire to be a missionary pilot at one point, but it never really happened and never really came to fruition. And I know you had to give that up. What God wanted you to do was more important than what you wanted you to do. And that story really stuck with me all these years. So, tell me, a little bit more detail about that.
When I was in high school, there were two of my buddies and we all had this real interest in aviation. Okay. And I can remember every chance I got, I'd go to town and buy the flying magazine. Okay. And it would have all the newest, planes, and I knew them all. I could tell you, the military, the civilian, the private planes, what they were, and I just was kind of consumed by that, and all three of us were. Mm-hmm. And I wrestled with what God was going to do with my life.
But you said this is about high school age?
Yeah, I was in probably 10th, 11th grade during that time. And I didn't have a call on my life. In fact, I resisted the idea of being in ministry. Because my grandparents were missionaries, my mom and dad were missionaries. Does that mean I have to be a missionary or preacher? And mom and dad never, ever put us in a position where they were, like, you really should do this. It was, whatever God calls you to do is what they wanted us to do. And that's so cool. I thought, well, okay, then I can be a pilot.
Yeah.
Because I love to fly and I love the idea of flying. And I really thought that's what I would pursue, but I couldn't, as I started making the choice of, like, even where I'm going to go to school, I don't know why I chose the Bible college. It wasn't even the one that my mom and dad went to. In fact, it was one my grandparents went to. Okay. And as I went there, they had they were starting a missionary pilot program in their studies. And
oh wow, and that probably piqued your interest, didn't it?
Yeah, and so I thought, okay, and I do remember, and I don't know exactly when it was, whether it was still in high school or whether it was in early college, that I did feel that God was calling me to ministry of some kind of full-time service.
Okay.
And so my processing of that is, then God wants me to be a missionary pilot instead of a fighter pilot or a commercial pilot. And so I can get what I want and still do what God wants. And so I'll be a missionary pilot.
Yeah, makes sense, right?
Yeah. And I wrestled with that for a while and never did get into the pilot program, aviation program. And it was I think my junior year in college, really. All this time, I don't even remember the processing of it, but I ended up in the ministry track in college,
Okay.
pursuing a Bachelor of Theology, and yet I wasn't going to be a preacher. You know what I mean?
In your mind, you're
And
like,
so,
nah, I don't want to be a preacher. Yeah.
it was, some people have a call in which they can go, I remember God called me right there. I was at the altar. I was in a service. I was praying or whatever.
Hmm.
Um, but it wasn't that way for me. It was about a 6-month period,
Hmm.
almost 2 semesters at college, where at the beginning I was seeking, I don't know what I'm going to do. And at the end of it, I knew God wanted me to preach.
Oh, wow.
And I can't tell you where in that process, but in that, coming out of that, I knew just as certain as if God had spoke to me at an altar and said, you're going to do this. I knew that that was what God wanted me to do, and I surrendered to it. And the amazing thing is that God has allowed me to travel all over the world to do that which my heart desired, but not in the way that I thought it would happen, or the way that I said, God, I'll do it this way if you'll, put your stamp of approval on my plans.
Uh-huh.
And so I don't look back with any regrets. Both of my friends that were into aviation, one did become a pilot, became a pilot on Cayman Airways, and the other ran, I don't know exactly his job, but he had a high job in the airport in Grand Cayman.
Okay.
And so, it's just one of those things that, as I look back on it, I don't have any regrets, but I still love to fly and I still love to go places. And every chance I get, I'm saying, yeah, let's hit the road, let's fly, let's
Yeah, I
travel,
know
let's
you
go
like to travel.
someplace.
You've been just about everywhere. And I've been to a few places with you myself, haven't I?
Yeah, yeah.
So one of the things I really appreciate about you, Pastor Bob, is um, you're so humble but I love your sense of humor, and I love that you're funny and you like to laugh and joke around and have a good time. And I think a lot of people, a lot of non-Christians have this caricature of Christians and Christianity that they're not any fun, and they don't don't joke around, and they don't have a sense of humor or anything like that. But I just wanted to let you know that that's one of the things I really appreciate about you, is just how down to earth, and just you're if I didn't know you were a pastor and I was just spending the day with you, I would think that you're just like everybody else. And usually we have this idea of what a pastor is supposed to be like and everything, but and sometimes that can be kind of off-putting, if you think a pastor should be so stoic and serious all the time. But I really appreciate how open and honest you are about your own personal life, and about your sense of humor, and you use those things to share your faith and share your wisdom with the church and with anybody that's around you. And I just think that's pretty cool.
Thank you.
All right. Is there anything else you would like to share with our audience about, believing in Christ, or, pursuing that relationship with Jesus? I think a lot of people have this idea that once you get saved, then everything goes perfect and God just blesses and blesses, and, nothing ever goes wrong. But I know there's been a lot of things that have gone wrong in your life and my life as well. And so, is there and I don't know why I'm going in that direction with it, but is there anything that you can share? It doesn't even have to be a personal thing, but that would be an encouragement to Christians that may be going through a hard time right now, especially with the world as crazy as it is, or maybe a non-Christian that looks at Christianity and thinks, well, those Christians, their lives aren't any better than mine, so why should I, believe their God? I know I was throwing a lot at you there, but something that can you share something that, in closing, that would be an encouragement?
I think that one of the things that is misunderstood, and sometimes some lines of preaching and theology kind of sets it up as if you become a Christian, then everything is going to turn up roses for you. Mm-hmm. And if it isn't, it's because something's wrong with you. And I don't think that is biblical.
No.
If you look at the Bible and the stories of the Bible, those that followed Jehovah, those that followed Christ, suffered greatly, went through persecution and experiences that were hard to face and to accept.
Right.
But one of the things that I think is important that we understand is that God calls us. Paul tells us that we are called to suffer with Christ, and that suffering is a gift. Without suffering, we'll never know our need of God or how God can work. It is in the dark times of life. I think back when my dad was burned, I was just 13 years old, I think. And all of a sudden, I was thrust into the position of my mom turning to me and say, Bob, what do we do? We got to get your dad off of this island. How do we go about it? What do we do? Do we contact? And to watch in those moments as God began to show himself. I can remember as a kid, Dad was burnt, and for a week or so, he lay in the hospital in Grand Cayman, where they thought that they could handle whatever his burns were. But in the whole time, he was just filling up with infection, and they didn't know it. And during that time, I can remember everywhere I'd go, I'd run into someone and they'd say, give this to your mom, give this to your mom. And all of a sudden we had, I can't remember the number, I think it was $8,000 in cash. Wow. That people had just handed to us. And when we finally were able to get Dad off the island, when they finally said, you got to get him off now if he's going to live. And we got to Miami, and at that time, you had to pay for your own private duty nurse if you needed a nurse around the clock. And all of a sudden, Mom had to pay these nurses every day. They were like private duty nurses. I don't really understand how it worked. But do you know how much it cost for the time that we were there? It was like $8,000, almost to the penny what God had given to us. And over, we encountered that. The hospital that we wanted to take him to couldn't accept him, and we had to take him to a different hospital. And the doctor that he got was a doctor that had been burned, knew exactly what Dad was going through. Okay. And just time after time after time, God showed himself. And we would never have experienced any of those things if it wasn't for the suffering,
right?
The hard time. Something my dad said about that time has always stuck with me. He said, I would never want to go through that again. If I got burned, I just think I'd say, God, take me. Mm-hmm. But he said, I wouldn't take it out of my life for anything, because so many things happen because of the journey we had to go through suffering. Right. And so, this Sunday, if you want to listen in, I'm preaching And
Okay.
we're in a series on rejoice, and my title is Rejoice When Life Hurts.
There you go.
So kind of fits in with what
Yeah.
we're saying.
And, a lot of times, people think Christians are immune to different things, whether it's temptation or whether it's sickness, disease, but, Christians still can get the coronavirus, right?
Yep,
Christians still
definitely.
suffer with cancer. Christians still have things that they go through, but the difference is Christians have the Holy Spirit to go through it with us, and
Mhm.
we have an extra level of support on a spiritual level to help us through those things. It doesn't mean those things are any easier to go through necessarily, but we have an extra bit of hope, an extra bit of something to look
Well,
forward to.
it's just like God uses those things in our life to reveal himself to us and
Hmm.
to the world around us. Um, we think of the babe Jesus in the manger at this time of year, and the Savior has come, Emmanuel, God is with us, and all of those wonderful things. He's brought peace and joy and all of those things. But the real thing that revealed God was Jesus dying on the cross, taking our place.
Yep.
That is where God was really revealed. And if it hadn't have been for that, he would just been another man living a good life.
Hmm.
But his suffering is where God was revealed.
That's
And in
truth.
our lives, where God is revealed the most is not when everything's going hunky dory and we can say uh, that we are have everything in our just the way we want it to go.
Hmm.
But what really shows Christ is when our attitude is different because of what Christ is in us. And so we may be facing cancer just like their neighbors facing cancer, but how do we react?
Right.
When we lose our job, or where is our dependency? It's a different way of looking at life,
Yep.
and all of us face hardships, but how do we handle them?
Yep.
And so that's the difference that Christ makes. Not necessarily, he can deliver, and he does, but I would say for the most part, he takes us through the storm and not out of the storm.
Exactly. Yeah. He promises to go through those things with us. And so how can people connect with the church? I know we have online services and, of course, physical in church services as well. But what's the best way that people can connect with the church right now?
Well, definitely, we still are having in-person services, 9 o'clock and 10:30 on Sunday morning. And at those same times, you can watch us live on Hyde Wesleyan Facebook page or
Hmm.
the Hyde Wesleyan YouTube channel. And you can also listen to them later and as a recording. But you could join us in those ways. We have a web page, hydewest.com.
Hmm.
If you just want to see who we are and a little bit about us and who the Hyde Wesleyan Church is.
So you can pretty much
And
find Hyde Wesleyan anywhere online. Just do a little search, right?
yep, yep.
And watch online on Sunday service or join us in person. And of course, all the social distancing protocols are in place, and all the masking and all that kind of stuff is encouraged. So if you feel safe to come on out and visit. Now you got a lot of Christmas themed services coming up here in the next few weeks. You got Advent every week, and of course Christmas Eve service is happening. But if you can join online, that's at least one way that you can do that. So thank you, Pastor Bob, for taking a little bit of time out of your day and sharing a little bit of your heart.
Well, thanks for having me.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that interview with Pastor Bob. And if you like what we're doing here at Church of the Undead, you can help support us by going to Get in Gear merch and buying a t-shirt. We have lots of t-shirts there for sale, just like this one right here. Church of the Undead logo. And I also have shirts like this. This one is Beware, Sheep Have Teeth. And you can go to the website and find out what story that's all about. But it's part of our Ferocious Faith clothing line. You can see the logo there at the top. Ferocious Faith. Go to getingearmerch.com. Click on the Ferocious Faith logo, and you can find all kinds of cool t-shirts like this. Church of the Undead. There's some other types of shirts there as well. But I'll put a link above or below this video. And, or matter of fact, I'll just put it right here on the screen, and you can go there as well. So check it out and help support Church of the Undead. Thanks.